Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Ben Data, co-chair of DSW. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of Denver Startup Week. This community has been the catalyst for lots of change over the past decade, and this week we're coming together to celebrate the past and dream big for the future. We are able to bring Denver Startup Week to this community thanks to our 2021 sponsors. Thank you to our HQ and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors, whose leadership makes this week come to life. Capital One Cafe, Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork. And our track sponsors, who have made all of the great content you're hearing today possible. Founder Track, Kickstart, Growth Track, Friday Health Plans, Developer Track, Quizlet, Product Track, Palantir, Designer Track, Battery 621 in the Public Works, People Track, Exactly, and Spotlight event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to B-Side Fund, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing Company, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, Gusto, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pine Insurance, Promontory Mortgage Path, Red Bull Basement, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Please say thank you to these companies as you enjoy our hybrid Denver Startup Week. And don't forget to use hashtag #DenStartupWeek to share your experience and moments of inspiration on social media. Have a great week.
Welcome to this session of Denver Startup Week. I'm Serene Pappenfuss, a principal at Kickstart Fund. We're on a mission to build great companies in the Wild West by backing the boldest entrepreneurs with capital, community, and expertise for the journey. A lot of VCs happen to invest in Colorado. At Kickstart, we focus on it. We love our Colorado startups, Sondermind, Nomad, Pomp, and Havenly, just to name a few. Because we were among the first seed funds in the region, we know what it's like to start something before others understand your vision, which means we're willing to lead investments in promising teams. We use our experiences to grow your startup and recruit top talent. Our portfolio is filled with visionary founders like you who are committed to moving the whole ecosystem together. It's the network effect in full effect. Raising venture capital is more than swapping shares for money. It's inviting the right investors to complement your team. We hope we'll be your choice for seed funding in the Mountain West, and we hope you enjoy this session.
Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary of Denver Startup Week. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, or the combination of those identities. There's something for everyone at DSW, thanks to all of our community members who submitted their best content to make this week what it is. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors for their support in helping us to keep DSW free and accessible for all, especially our founder track sponsor, Kickstart. With that, please enjoy this session and the entire week ahead.
All right, welcome everyone. Really pleased to have you all here. I'm Fiona Tang, co-founder of Him for Her. We're a social impact venture and we're dedicated to corporate board diversity. So super excited to have you here to discuss startup and scale-up boards. So we have a few amazing panelists of experts from different seats at the board table and a few goals for the discussion. One is to, of course, share data and experiences from the boardroom for the board building CEOs among us. We'll be talking about recommendations for how to think about board building. For the executives, we'll be talking about how to consider board seats as growth opportunity for your career. And then, of course, this is going to be super interactive. So if you have any questions, please do drop them into chat and we'll work them in. So before we begin, and hope this works, we'll have our friends at Denver Startup Week put in a quick poll so that we can get a pulse of, and here it is, what you identify with, what best describes you. And we have a few options. We have founder building a board. I'm seeing that there's a lot there. We'll have active board member, aspiring board member, investor, and then other. If you do have an other, feel free to drop that in chat just so we have a sense of that. And then there's just a few more seconds for this poll. This is fun, getting it live. Okay. All right, so it feels like we're pretty heavily on the founder building a board, and then with a good kind of division across the rest. So good thing is that we'll have a lot of content here today to really address that. And then starting with introductions, and we'll just quickly share the poll results so that you guys can see that. So starting with introductions, we'll go around our panelists, and if you can each share your current role and any boards you're on. Emily, let's start with you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I am Emily Rollins, a retired audit partner from Deloitte, and I'm currently on 4 boards. One is Dolby Laboratories, which is on the New York Stock Exchange. The second is a newly public company called Xometry on NASDAQ. I'm also on the prospectus for Science 37, which is going to hopefully be listed next week. And then I'm on one private company board called DolbyLabs. So those are all the boards I'm on. I'm on the audit committee for all of them because of my background, and I'm audit committee chair for Xometry and Science 37.
Wonderful. Jacqueline, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jaclyn Hester. I'm a partner at Foundry. 2 of the boards actually that Emily just mentioned are Foundry companies, so we're thrilled to have her and found her via him for her, which is awesome. I am on a bunch of private company boards, all startups, a range of them. So High Alpha, which is actually a venture studio, Gig Wage, Loop, which was just announced yesterday. And then I'm a board observer for a couple of boards, Speckit, all of these are in the Foundry portfolio, and Maru, and Elevate Security. Great to be here, and thank you for having me, and I hope y'all can hear me from my outdoor location.
It's a beautiful outdoor location, jealous.
Denver.
And now Matt.
Hi, glad to be here today. I'm Matt Blumberg. I'm co-founder and CEO of Bolster, which is a new startup that is kind of dual headquartered in the New York area, which is where I am, and the Denver area, which kind of follows the geography of my prior company, Return Path, which had a huge presence in the Denver area as well. I am, so Bolster is a marketplace for on-demand executive talent, and we actually help a lot of companies build their boards. So I've either done or am in the middle of something like 30 or 40 board searches in the last 12 months right now for private companies. And then myself, I'm currently on 3 boards. I'm chairing the Bolster board, which is private. I am the chair of the Path Forward board, which is a nonprofit. And I just joined the board of a publicly traded company called Oblong as well.
Wonderful. So to lay the groundwork for this conversation, Jacqueline, can you share what differentiates great boards from others?
So I think the best boards are ones where the CEO and the executive team get a lot out of the board meeting. And I think that's actually quite differentiated, because I find that many boards, sometimes you can have board members that take up too much oxygen. Sometimes you have founders that aren't really running the board meeting to get specific things out of it. It becomes sort of an update, like marching through a bunch of slides and having people in and out. And I think that what is differentiated is a board where the founder, CEO, and the executive team are truly tackling big problems. Sort of, here's the 3 things we're trying to get out of this meeting, these hard decisions we're trying to make. And so I think that's one piece, is the actual board meeting, that you're getting a lot out of that. And the other thing is just boards where the board members are really active. They're sort of working for the company, helping with talent searches, helping with customer introductions and product roadmaps and all sorts of things. So I think having really engaged boards is also something that's quite differentiated. And boards where you have some operators and not just a bunch of investors are excellent and highly recommended. So those are my things.
Awesome. And then just to further that, Matt, what is the impact a great board can have?
Yeah, well, I would say that, I mean, a bad board can have a tremendous impact as well. So, you know, if you assume sort of rule of thirds, like a third of boards are great and a third are bad and a third are just kind of the boards that are just sort of take up time and space. boards that are bad can kill a company. Look at Theranos, if you want to, like the highest profile one, right? That was a board full of luminaries and people that you would think of as trophy board members that were kind of asleep at the switch. But to answer your question, right, what's the impact that a great board can have? A great board is a strategic asset for a CEO, for a founder. And I always used to call our board at Return Path, and I think about our board at Bolster as being a strategic weapon. And Jacqueline's right. I mean, if you have a diverse board, a board that has operators on it, an engaged board, you can have incredibly effective board meetings and board conversations. And my board at Return Path, I was very, very lucky to have 3 very experienced senior operators, in addition to 3 venture capitalists, in addition to me. And I can answer your question by just saying how I felt during my board meetings and how I felt at the end of my board meetings, which was just this huge dopamine rush. Of having the privilege of spending a few hours with that group, chewing through the thorniest problems we had in the business in open, constructive dialogue, and just learning and coming away from every meeting with pages and pages of notes and ideas and thoughts. And I mean, that's what a great board does. It inspires a founder and a CEO and a management team to do the best they can.
That's great. I love the inspiration and the secret weapon aspect of it. And we always say that, you want to get board members that you can't get enough time with. So it sounds like that's pretty aligned. And now thinking a little bit about composition, Emily, when you think about board members that companies should be adding, management team, independents, investors, what's the board best kind of makeup for that? And how might this vary at different stages of a company's life cycle?
Yeah, so obviously initially when you start a company and found it, you don't necessarily want too big of a board. It might become unruly and trying to work on reporting to them on a consistent basis when really you should be up and running and getting your company on the right trajectory. When you bring in investors, especially great investors like Foundry, they're going to bring the expertise that is necessary for the type of business that what you're going to do to scale, because they want their investment to produce results. So they're going to have members of their team that have the background and expertise and connections to help you succeed. Then you start adding other board members that might have an expertise that's either lacking in your executive team or something you really need to enhance. So that's the next stage that I see companies do, is try to find those board members that can help complement or enhance what the company's trying to fill out on their executive team. When you're getting closer to, IPO, if that's the idea, that's when you start thinking about independent board members. Unfortunately, is that this last year, there's been a lot of IPOs, and a lot of companies, especially those that are getting acquired by SPACs, are trying to find independent board members at the last minute. And so there's a little bit of a rush. I definitely have seen more recruiters this year than any other year doing searches because of the expediency aspect. So these companies haven't really thought about it ahead of time to try to think about who in their network would be a potential independent board member who might be able to be a good board member as a public company. So I think the other aspect is just how many. Again, initially it's kind of a smaller group. I've seen surveys, and maybe Bolster even knows more than I do in terms of this, but I've seen surveys from 3 board members all the way to 31. I think the sweet spot's 7. And a lot of public companies will have maybe 7 to 14 or 15, depending on areas of expertise that people have to round out, including regulatory aspects.
Fiona, can I add something really quickly to what Emily just said?
Please.
So we at Foundry, we actually think bringing in independents a lot earlier can be helpful, and they don't need to be public company ready board members. But even at Series A, it's really helpful to have operators in the mix. And so one thing we often do sort of in being flexible and collaborative is we don't need to take a board seat every time. If we have somebody that we trust, especially on the investment side, that's on the board, we're happy to take an observer seat and give, just so that it doesn't get too big, give an independent seat up and bring in an operator. Even sometimes like someone that's an active CEO in a startup, but further along than your company can be really helpful because they're sort of going through, they've sort of just been through some of the same problems. So especially given Emily's point that it's hard to find those people, like when you really need them, it's great. We think it's great and good hygiene to get them in earlier.
Yeah, Matt, you're nodding. So I know that this is a question that we were going to cover anyway, but given that we're on it, and this is an important one, would love to have you weigh in too.
Yeah, I think it's never too early to have your first independent board member, even seed stage, right? You don't have to wait for the Series A. At my companies, we've always had independent board members super early in the game, and usually actually the first couple are not CEOs. They're certainly not necessarily public ready, but they might be head of product or head of marketing or head of sales in a relevant sector. My sort of rule of thumb is always to balance out the number of independents with the number of investors around a board table. Just think about it like when you add your first investor, you add your first independent or even add the independent sooner. When you add your second investor, add your second independent to keep a balanced board. And I view board construction, Emily, much the way you said it, sort of think about your board as a team, think about your board and your management team together as a team. What are the things that you want to emphasize or amplify, or what are the things that are missing? We always advise clients to think about a few different vectors of experience, whether it's the domain or the function or the size and stage or the type of customer you sell to, and try to find board members that meet one or two of those things where the rest of the extended team might be a little bit light.
That's amazing foundation. And while we're on the topic of these foundational aspects of board building, let's also talk a little bit about the data. At Him for Her, we've done for the last 2 years an annual study on private company board makeup and looked at venture-backed, found that most of them, over half of them are all male and 3% are women of color. And Matt, I know that the Bolster put out a board benchmark study as well this year. Would love to hear highlights from that and how that might compare as well.
Yeah, highlights and lowlights as they were. I think the research that we did is very compatible with the research that you did, Fiona. Your survey, if I remember correctly, was private companies that had gotten 100 million or more in financing. And our survey was private companies in general, so it's across the whole spectrum, but that includes a lot of smaller and earlier stage companies as well. The first thing we learned, which I've found surprising, was that only a third of the boards we surveyed had any independent directors. Only a third had any independent, so 2/3 had none. And even if you break that down and you look at Series C and Series D companies, 67% of those companies have independents, but 30 to 40% don't. And independents are not just, that's the rush that Emily was talking about, like, oh my God, I'm about to go public, or a SPAC is knocking and my board's completely not public ready. It's really hard to start that in Series C or Series D. So anyway, the first thing we learned was only a third of boards have independents, which was pretty surprising. In terms of diversity, I think we found the same kinds of things that that you found in your study, Fiona. Director seats are held primarily by men in private companies. Like 86% are male, 14% are female. And on the diversity side, 80% are white. And when you put the two of those things together, boards are very, very homogenous in terms of their representation of society and how they look, and frequently how they think as well. I would say the most surprising thing for me, because I expected the lack of diversity on boards, but the surprising thing for me was the complete lack of independent directors, especially at early stages.
Yeah, and I think that this underscores the importance of this particular hour that we're spending together. And so Jacqueline, I think to segue into that, where do you see gaps in building a board for most founders? And then kind of on the other side of that, what skills do you see as being most additive to a board?
So I think especially early on, I'm not sure that founders know exactly what they're supposed to do with a board. And so I think that there's often this thought that the board is coming in to control my company. And if you're taking money from good investors, you should be thinking about it very differently, which is the board is here to help me. And that is the board's job. And not to be like scared that the board's gonna fire you or not let you do something. It's really more about getting help. And so I think that might be just a gap in understanding, especially at the earliest stages. And then I think like taking that a step further is how to make your board actually effective and putting people to work. And so I think what you have to do is spend time with each board member and do one-on-one so that you get to know like, what can this person help me with? And then have a clear understanding amongst the board of what everybody's working on. I think it's also good to have your board members interacting with each other, which in today's Zoom world is sort of challenging, as many of us are investing in companies where we certainly haven't met the other board members, but we haven't even met the founders a lot of the time. And we don't necessarily want to go back to the days of getting on a plane every quarter to go to an in-person board meeting. We're thinking maybe like once a year is good for in-person. But finding ways to have board members interacting with each other can also help them share ideas about how to best help the company. And I think that's another gap where founders might be concerned. It's like, oh, if my board members are talking to each other, there's something wrong, or they're gonna like go around my back. And so again, like it's really important you pick the right partners so that you don't have those dynamics. But I think just understanding like what exactly you should be doing with the board. And then the last piece I'll say is just what a good board deck looks like. And I've seen a huge variety. And a big waste of time is when, one, if you don't send your board deck ahead of time, everyone's like sort of learning as they go, so that like you don't really get much out of people. And two is if you're just not sharing enough data with your board so that they're asking a bunch of questions that you definitely have the answer to and could have given them if you had a more robust board deck. And so you're wasting a lot of time because they don't have the same information that the team does. And so you waste time on that. So I think just like working with other founders, maybe Bolster will put together a great board deck template for companies at different stages, but understanding sort of like what needs to be in there, what the cadence should be, and how to get the most out of your board members. There's a book that my partner Brad Feld wrote. I think Matt, you wrote it with him or wrote part of it or something like that, called Startup Boards. That's a helpful and relatively quick read to just understand all the different pieces, and knowing things like setting up what Emily talked about, an audit committee or a compensation committee, like just even knowing that you're supposed to do that. I think a lot of founders just have, especially at the early stages, just aren't aware of those things.
Yeah, I'll +1 on that book because there's like different sections in there that make it really actionable. And maybe we can drop in a link so that you guys don't have to Google it. And then just thinking a little bit more about that, you know, Emily, you mentioned that, you know, heading into the IPO, as we think about a board director's role, what should they be looking to add to a company throughout different cycles of a company's?
Yeah, so Jacqueline already touched upon, you know, in any exchange, they're going to want to see a compensation committee and an audit committee. So you need at least individuals that would be able to be qualified to do that. Finding a financial expert to be on the audit committee or someone with financial background may not be that difficult, but it might be more difficult to find a chair for that, someone who would feel comfortable enough to be responsible for the cadence and agenda for an audit committee. So those are the things you should be looking at when you're thinking about an IPO. Other areas that I've seen that have been really helpful, either as temporary committees or ongoing committees, is starting to evolve in regards to, you know, if you're a company that isn't tech savvy and you're switching to a completely different model for selling your business or your services, then maybe a technology committee or a strategy committee is really important. Another that I've seen is if you're a regulated industry, you might have experts that are operators or compliance folks from regulated industries, either energy or banking or life sciences, and people who have FDA background. Another committee that I think is really up and coming, or two of them, are cyber and also ESG, depending on how much of that is involved in your company. So if, for example, if you're an oil company, you might want a specific committee that will hold them accountable to sustainability and climate. So cyber is really important if your entire business is online. So those are the types of maybe individuals that have those expertise, but also you could create subcommittees for your boards, just so that there's very specific targeted topics for reporting back to the board as the company's progress.
I think one of the things that's worth thinking about, because I think our audience here at Startup Week is probably a lot of really early stage founders, is a lot of those things come into play when you're larger. And when you're sort of at the Series C and D stage. And if you think about adding independent directors to your board at the A stage or even at the seed stage, you don't have to necessarily worry about that. You're not necessarily appointing a board member for life. You're appointing someone, and hopefully one of the things we encourage really early stage companies to do is to give an independent board member a 2-year option vest instead of a 4-year option vest, because what you need on your board today is going to be really different than what you need on your board 2, 4, 6, 8 years from now. So those are all really important topics in terms of governance and oversight, particularly of a larger company, where maybe the needs you have as a startup CEO are much more focused on product market fit and critical introductions and like getting your first $2 million in revenue. And you don't have to feel like you're locked into to a director for forever.
Yeah, and Matt, just on that topic, would love to hear any compensation benchmarks you're seeing, because I'm sure that that's a frequently discussed topic.
It is, yeah, and it's kind of interesting. The one thing that I think a lot of early stage CEOs don't even realize is you're only paying board members equity. I think in our entire survey, 1 or 2 directors received any cash compensation for private companies. And then when we peeled into those, it's that those people were also doing consulting work for the company. So you should really just think about creating an equity package for independent board members that vests, it could vest 4 years, or it could vest 3 or 2 or even 1. And the benchmarks we did on compensation were all over the map, because there's never really been kind of a definitive study published of private company director comp. And it's also really hard to normalize the value of private company equity. But what I would say, there's sort of 2 rules of thumb that I can give you that we've heard over time. One is that you should think about the equity value of a board member comparably to the equity value of a member of your executive team. So if you're hiring a head of marketing, what would you pay that person in equity? Think about that on an annual basis, and then however many years of a grant vest you're giving an independent director would be similar to that. And what we saw in the benchmarks was that the amount of equity went down over time as companies got larger and more mature and had done more financings and therefore were de-risked. So we saw a really wide range of kind of basis points per year of equity, which was the metric that we were using to try to standardize things. Once you're up to Series D, it's 5 basis points per year of equity, something like that. And then you can just work it back until you're in the seed stage, where it's probably 20 basis points of equity per year of vest, and almost kind of a straight line between the 2.
That's great.
Fiona, I just want to clarify one thing for founders, especially at the early stages. Your VCs should not be getting additional equity for being on your board.
No,
and if anybody ever tries to pull that, run away and don't take their money, because that is absolutely predatory and not market.
Or cash. Right, it's their job. It is their job to be on your board. Their LPs are paying them to be on your board.
Yeah, those are good underscores. I think we had asked that question as independent board compensation, but really good to flag. And then just kind of thinking about where to find independent board directors. Jacqueline, do you have any tips there?
Well, my first call is always to him for her. So
Hey, wait a
It's not a leading
or
question.
to Bolster. I
Or
mean,
Bolster.
I do them simultaneously and we all work together. So, you know, a lot of times founders will just have mentors that are strategic that they've talked to that are, you obviously don't want a competitor company, but a company that's like been in a similar space or has a similar business model, or just someone you really respect that has a lot of experience. Folks that you know, it's helpful because you sort of have a sense for who they are and what it is to bring them in versus a complete stranger. But you definitely want somebody that's strategic. So working through your networks. I think often, you know, if you take money from a venture capital firm, there are CEOs that they've worked with in the past, like from their portfolio or other operators that can be helpful. I think some founders have a little bit of pause around bringing someone in that's from that VC's portfolio as independent because they question whether it's truly independent. So I think it's sort of like situational, and you've got to sort of know the players and see how you feel about that. So those are ways of going, a couple ways of going about it. And sometimes if you have like an early angel investor that is an operator, they don't necessarily sign up for taking a board seat, but they will do it sort of as a separate thing. Like it's not really part of their angel check, but sometimes they'll do it separately. So that's another good place to look.
Great tips. Matt, did you have anything else to kind of add? And then of course, you know, we always try to encourage going outside of your network as well, just so that you can get that added diversity. But
for sure, yeah, you know, most networks are notoriously not diverse. So no, you know, look, I think sourcing very broadly is important. I also think if you're a founder, you're a CEO, and one of your, I don't know, kind of most interesting or poignant calling cards is, hi, I'm interested in interviewing you or talking to you about potentially joining my board. You can reach pretty high with that ask. And you may not get a favorable response every time. But over the years, I have met some people that I never thought would take a meeting with me because I thought they might be an interesting board member. And you know, that's just something that really senior people, like look at Emily here, right? Incredibly accomplished, multiple public boards, you know, long career in public audit. My guess is if a CEO of an interesting venture-backed company reaches out to her, now she may have too many boards at the moment, but she's going to be inclined to take that meeting.
And that's a great segue to Emily. Would love to just hear how you've gotten in touch with the board opportunities you've considered, the seats that you're currently on. How does that compare to the advice that we're giving?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely the first one that I received was through a recruiter. So I had helped for about a decade in helping women and diverse professionals get ready for board service. I used to be a leader in our diversity and inclusion up in the Seattle office. And, you know, I saw with the executives that we had been interacting with, more and more of them had been thinking about board service, but didn't really know how to get involved. And so really just helped set up some programs for people to get ready for board service, including the types of roles that you might want to take in your current position so that you're ready and your bio's ready in the future, like P&L responsibilities or something else along those lines to get your resume or bio ready. So the first one came through a recruiter, a professional recruiting firm. The second one came through Deloitte. So each public accounting firm has some board ready programs, and they keep a list of names of individuals who would be, you know, ready for different committees and also for public company boards. And then him for her. I got my most recent board through him for her, and I'd met Jaclyn a few years back when I was moved to Austin, and you guys had started your chapter here with some great people. And you know, that's another network that's really great to tap into, because it's not that you guys expect any kind of commission back or anything. It's more for the cause, and I really like that too. So that's how I got into the positions that I had. And with Matt saying, you know, I'm overboarded or fully boarded, yes, there is something to say for the NYSE rules and Glassdoor rule on not recommending board members for reappointment if they're overboarded. And it's kind of a, right now it's about on NYSE, it's 4 audit committees, public company audit committees. And then everyone else has some kind of range between 4 and 6 boards as a possibility. They don't really count private company boards because they feel that that's a little bit more flexible, as well as maybe not as big of a time commitment. But you know, it's still about your time and how much time you want to spend. So if you're a current sitting executive, I wouldn't recommend more than 1 or 2 boards because you want to be considerate about giving and devoting enough time to the other company that's not your company that you're running. And then if you're fully retired like me, you know, it's not even as busy with being on 4 or 5 boards as was when I was serving over a dozen clients from startup to public companies. So it all depends, and they've got different rules for folks in regards to how many boards they can be on. But I will add that I do take the call, and primarily because I have a huge network of folks that I think are board ready. And so I typically will recommend a couple of folks to take on, you know, potentially would fit in with that company. So that's how I'm expanding the network.
I love that. And, you know, it's our testament too. It's just like the expansion of networks and extending networks where possible, because it is so trust-based, to Jacqueline's earlier point. And then thinking a little bit about the board recruitment process, just to kind of really drill down into this whole process, Matt. What are some best practices and tips that you can share there? Matrices being used? Is it best if the CEO is running the search? What have you seen and what can you share?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think in a public company, you might have a nom-gov chair that does board searches. In a private company, if you're the founder, you're the CEO, you're the one running the search. It's a hire that you are making. So I can point to a few things that I think are really important. It's a similar process in a lot of ways to the process of hiring a senior executive. And the first thing I would say is you just have to take the process seriously, and you're the one that has to give it cadence. So if you're hiring a VP of engineering, your organization is going to give it cadence because your organization probably desperately needs that person. The only person that's going to really drive the urgency of adding an independent board member is you. And we see a lot of clients who, you know, sort of start the process in earnest, and then, you know, it becomes a second priority and then a third priority. And, you know, the founders really have to just stay on it to drive the process to completion. We talked about sourcing and sourcing broadly already, but, you know, in terms of the actual interview process, you want to interview a lot of people. You want to have a lot of people interview at least a couple of finalists. So you probably want all of your other board members, if you have a few board members, to interview each of a couple of finalists. You probably want certainly any co-founder, but probably a couple members of your management team to interview every finalist as well, and get different reads and different points of view from all those stakeholders. You definitely want to check references. If the person's been a board member, it's easy to ask them to connect you with the CEOs of companies they've served before. If they've never been a board member, ask them for a reference of someone they've been an advisor to or a mentor or something like that. So you have some outside check on them. 2 more quick best practices. One thing I always do and advise is to have the finalist, not multiple finalists, but the finalist actually audition by coming to a board meeting. So before you put that person on the board, they know they're toward the end of the process. You've probably already had a conversation about compensation. They've probably already met everyone on your board. Actually have them attend a board meeting, not as an observer, but as an active participant, and see how they do. And tell them it's important to you that they come to that board meeting ready to engage. You have to spend time getting them ready for it. You send them materials like other board members. You spend extra time prepping them for it because they're not up to speed on all the issues. But it's a really good way of seeing what the chemistry is like with that person in the room. And depending on who else is on your board and how loud their voices are, and what the dynamics are that you're expecting, that may be something that either encourages you to move forward with that person, or in some cases may convince you that actually they're not the right person for the job, which happened to me probably about 15 years ago at Return Path. I ended up bouncing someone out of a process when I was convinced that I was going to hire him for the board seat, because he showed up at the board meeting, and despite my telling him many times that it was not observing that he was participating, he didn't say anything the whole meeting, even when I asked him pointed, direct questions. And I knew he wasn't going to be able to be a strong voice in the boardroom if he couldn't do that. And then I realize this is a long answer. I'm sorry. The very last thing I would say is, don't be afraid to ding people. It's an interview process. Even if you're interviewing people who are way more senior than you, way more accomplished in life, at some point you do have to say, I'm making a decision about this one person, and everyone else you have to ding. But I would say you want this to be like the most gracious ding of your life, because the people who are really in the shoot with you for a board seat have spent time with you. They've learned your business. They're usually pretty senior and accomplished people. You want them to go out there and be an ambassador for your business. Maybe they're a candidate for the next board seat that comes up, but you want them to come away feeling like, wow, that was a great process. That's a world-class CEO. That's a business that I want to stay close to as well.
That's so important. And I want to just plus one that, because I feel like this world we live in is so relationship driven, that I think that to Matt's point, the ding is just as important as the whole journey of the evaluation. Jacqueline, anything to add to that from the investor's perspective?
I think Matt covered it. I would just say, again, like, put your existing board to work to help find people. But I think that's the point you made earlier, Fiona, extending the network is really important. So making sure you're not getting someone that's sort of repetitive of the networks you already have access to, and the experience you already have access to with your existing board. And then one thing that Matt said about the dings, and not being afraid to like do that, even though these people are seemingly senior to you. I meant to say this earlier, like, as far as your board and how people are acting, you should give feedback to your board. It's hard to do, but you want to build the type of relationship where you can actually give feedback to members of your board if they're acting in a way that's not productive, or if they could be doing more of something that is actually helpful. And you may have to fire a board member at some point, and that's okay. Like, not everybody should just automatically get to be on your board forever if they are either not helpful or if they're sort of counterproductive. So just important to know that you, like, that's your job as the founder and CEO. Like, you manage the board, so all of these things are your job.
And we'll come back to that, the onboarding and offboarding topic, because I think it's an important one to drill into. But before we move on from this particular topic, Emily, is there anything that has stood out for you from the candidate's perspective in the interviewing process? And maybe that's something where we have a question in chat about directors and officers insurance. So maybe you can touch on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so in the interviewing process, I think it's very interesting because, you know, the level that, I've interviewed lots of people for different positions at the firm, but in being interviewed, it's more of a conversation at this level. I think they're trying to gauge whether or not you're going to have a good rapport, especially with the executives. You're going to have a good rapport with the executives if you're going to be able to have an opinion in the boardroom and be able to, you know, be a participating member, not just someone that's going to, you know, take the position, just do the minimum. You know, they really want to see through conversation the ways that you'll interact with the rest of the board and the executive team. I think that, you know, D&O insurance is really important. There's a minimum amount that probably is important. I think it all depends on your level of risk tolerance. Just like you're doing an investment, I think this is the same idea. Your investment, you know, risk tolerance, as well as how you want to see yourself in regards to, if you're on a board, your reputation is somewhat tied to them now. So you want to make sure you've done some due diligence in regards to the executives and the investors, have an understanding maybe through your network, if you know anybody that knows them, And then having good D&O insurance is always a good thing, but not every company, especially the smaller ones, can really afford it at this time. That the litigation rate in this country is pretty high, especially as it relates to governance. So the D&O insurance right now is through the roof. I've seen a couple because of these IPOs that I'm involved with, and they're double what I remember seeing even 2.5 years ago. So I would just say that, making sure too, you have also through your own personal homeowners insurance, you can have an umbrella policy that can help you with, unintended consequences of litigation. There might be an umbrella policy you can add to your homeowners insurance to help with your risk tolerance too.
For what it's worth, at Series A, when we invest, we will not sit on a board without D&O insurance. And we actually, it's important because it protects the CEO and founder, and other founders are often on the board. It protects you too. And so my guess is that at least most VCs wouldn't join a board unless you had it. And you can usually have a pretty small policy. It'd be interesting to see if you, Emily, given your comment, if they've gone up since we last did a little bit of research on it. But we typically think that you need to have that in place, and it's important.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so now, getting to the topic of onboarding, we think that getting folks into the boardroom is the first step, but just as important, and we touched on this a little bit. But Emily, how should CEOs and board directors think about onboarding a new board member just to ensure success?
Yeah, I think that, it's pretty obvious that you'd want them to meet all of your executive leadership team, the people that are the most important to your strategy and where you're going, making sure that they understand the vision as well as the mission statement of the company. Another that I think is just anyone who may be an up and comer that you're thinking of in regards to succession planning to leadership roles. They might be leading a strategic initiative, for example, but they're not an executive yet. I think that that's also important because they get to hear the passion from maybe less experienced individuals or newer individuals to the company, and they can help with providing wisdom and guidance, but also being able to promote the company in that arena if it resonates with that board member.
There are two other things that we do for and that we advise clients to do for onboarding directors. The first is I schedule a one-on-one with each new board member, maybe a day before a board meeting and the day after a board meeting, to do a little pregame and postgame with them. And I don't do that for indefinitely, but I do that for the first 2-3 meetings. The other thing we do is we assign a new director a board buddy. And the board buddy is someone who's been on the board and ideally is an experienced director and not the CEO, and ask them to kind of take the person under their wing again for the first handful of meetings. And they'll usually do their own sort of pregame and postgame with those board members. And it's a good way of getting someone onboarded to your board. It's also really good if you are adding people who are not experienced board members. It's a good way to help educate them on how to be a great board member too.
That's great. Jacqueline?
In the camp of things I wish I had done when I was joining boards more recently, often when I join a board that there isn't a board to begin with because it was a seed company that's just starting to have a board, being able to see a couple of the recent board decks is helpful to just get caught up. And I think just like having transparent conversations with the new board member of for the past couple quarters, these were the challenges, right? Like this was the number we didn't hit. We figured out this, so that they're not, because they're probably sitting there in the first board meeting they're in, trying to figure out here's a thing they're talking about. And it seems like everybody knows what's going on, and I don't know what it is. So just know, for a new board member wanting to understand, how long has this been a problem? Am I about to suggest something that they've already tried and it didn't work or whatever? So I think just getting folks up to speed on the issues. And then also one thing that wasn't mentioned is just establishing a cadence with that board member. So Matt talked about before and after. Over time, you probably won't have time to do that. And so for me, I do a monthly call with all the founders where I'm on the board, things of that nature, but just sort of figuring out what your cadence is going to be. And are you going to text each other? Do you use some other app? And I'm on Signal with a bunch of people because apparently people like Signal these days. So I think just figuring out sort of what your rapport is going to be.
Yeah, that's great. And then just to kind of further that thinking, Matt, maybe you can talk a little bit about reviewing sitting board members and what is a good approach around that.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Because the board is your boss, but you're probably the leader of the board, even if you don't have the chairman title. You're the leader of the organization. But it's really important to establish a culture of feedback on your board the same way you want to establish a culture of feedback on your executive team or inside your organization. And I was really, really fortunate about, I don't know, 12 years or so ago, I got to spend some time with Bill Campbell out in Silicon Valley, who was on Apple's board and Intuit's board, and just a legendary guy. And he had a large company board 360 process that he had kind of developed over the years and grooved. And I got to work with him to actually customize it for startups and for smaller companies. So it's actually something that we do at Bolster for our clients. But there's no magic to it other than, this is some specific set of questions. It looks and feels like any other 360, where a group of people are all rating and reviewing the group on how the group functions, as well as the individuals and how the individuals function as directors. If anyone is on this and wants more color on it, you can ping me offline. But essentially, it is a detailed process for collecting 360 feedback. It's too much to do it every year, but it's probably not too much to do it every 2 years. You want an outside facilitator to run it because you're a member of the board, so you don't want to be doing it yourself. And every time I've run one of those, I've gotten really, really actionable feedback, either about the group dynamic or about an individual board member. And I think Jacqueline said earlier, occasionally you will have to remove someone from the board. It could be a co-founder, it could be an independent, it could even be an investor. And if you have data coming from a board 360, it is much, much easier to have those conversations than if you're just doing it, because.
That's great, Matt. Thank you. And then just kind of to your point of offboarding longtime board members, maybe share a little bit about what the best practices are there.
I'm not sure which part of offboarding you mean, if you're talking about actually removing them or the part afterwards. The part afterwards is easy.
Yeah.
The part afterwards, you want to do an exit interview the same way you would with a senior executive, and have someone, not you, third-party facilitator, your head of HR, a coach, someone you work with, really do an exit interview. And what is that person's, unfiltered view of the company, of you as a leader, of the board dynamic? In terms of the conversation or conversations of actually removing someone from the board, they can be very difficult. Certainly asking a founder to step down from a board seat to make room for an independent or to make room for an investor, there's some logic to that. And a founder, you can say, hey, look, you're still sitting in the board meetings and you still have a loud voice there, but it's time for someone else to take the actual board seat because we have a limited number of seats and we want to bring new and fresh perspective in on that. Asking an investor asking an independent to step aside, the best thing you can do with that is to give them short terms to begin with. If you give them a 2-year vest instead of a 4, it's easy to wait out a 2-year vest unless the person's an absolute disaster, if they're not showing up to meetings, if they're really counterproductive. If they have a 2-year vest, the 2 years are up, they've been to their 8 board meetings or whatever it is, and you just thank them for their service and say, hey, I think we're ready to add some new person in, so we have new and fresh perspective. Asking an investor to leave the board is very, very challenging, and but it is doable. I've done one of those before. If you are adding more investors, you get to Series C, Series D, you have new leads coming in. Mm-hmm. It's okay to ask some of the early investors to roll off and maybe move into an observer role. That one's not terribly difficult. But if you have a firm that's heavily invested in the business and really entitled to a board seat, but a director who's just not doing a good job, really there are 3 things you can do. One is collect that data from a structured board review 360, and hopefully multiple board members are pointing that same thing out. 2 is you must get one of your other investors, preferably one of your other directors, preferably an investor, to work with you to talk to the firm that's involved. So you're not the only person doing it. And 3, hopefully over time, you've built relationships with other partners at that firm, and there's someone that you can call to have that kind of confidential conversation with, and bring that other board member with you, and bring the results of the 360 with you.
All super helpful, and love the advice around it. We have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get to some of the advisory directed conversations in chat or in the Q&A. Jacqueline, maybe you can share a little bit about how to think about boards versus advisory boards, because I know that Matt kind of almost said advisory board when he was answering versus observer.
Yeah, sure. And I'm gonna have to jump after this one. It is they're two very different things. So you can have lots of advisors, but they don't technically like work for you. Your board is supposed to be working for you and working for the company. And there is fiduciary duty involved, the bad word that my partners hate, in being a board member. And remember that the board members are doing what's best for the company, not necessarily their firm as a shareholder. So that's like an important nuance to understand the difference in. Advisory boards are different, but they're not as formal. It's not a thing you have to report to. They don't necessarily get any kind of control or voting. So great to have lots of advisors and lots of people out there helping you, but important to know that those are two different things.
That's great. And I feel like this hour was clearly not enough time for how meaty of a discussion this was. So really want to thank you all for spending your time with us. And special thanks to Emily Rollins, Jaclyn Hester, Matt Blumberg, and also thanks to Micah at Bolster, my colleague Laura, and for her, and then also our friends at Denver Startup Week. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.